At the time of this video, we are slowly approaching the winter months, and I'm going to share with you some of my tips on how to winterproof your violin this season. Hi, my name is Eric, and I am your guide to helping you become a better violinist. Winter can be very brutal for our upper string instruments, particularly violins, but this could also be pertaining to violas and cellos. And there are many reasons for this. There's because of the dryness in the air, we're getting less humidity, especially in the Northeast where I'm based. You could also have all sorts of different weather patterns that are happening on a week to week basis, and it's really hard for your instrument to adjust. So I want to offer you 5 really easy tips on how to winterproof your violin and how to keep up with maintenance throughout this season. Depending on your instrument, you might want to consider getting a humidifier. A humidifier allows the violin to absorb the moisture in the air. And what will this do is, of course, you don't want to over humidify the room because you don't want the violin to go from a really humid environment to a really dry environment. Then the violin is not going to really adjust accordingly. You want to have just enough humidification in the room that you're putting your instrument in, or enough humidification in the violin case. And there are all sorts of companies that sell products that allow like a Strato humidifier. It's not sponsored by them, but that's the one thing that comes to mind, like a Strato humidifier. You kind of put in the case. It comes with like a package, like crystallized packet. You pour water, and then it creates humidity in the air in the violin case. That's not necessarily the case with all violins. For instance, my instrument, as long as you have stable decrease in humidification throughout the season, then my violin tends to be okay. But some instruments are different and they need a little bit of that moisture. So I recommend maybe getting a humidifier in the room or maybe a humidifier in the violin case to really help you stabilize the tuning stability of your instrument. In that light, the next thing I would recommend you get is a hygrometer. A hygrometer is a device in your violin case that determines how much humidity is in the air. For me, my violin is happy between 40 and 60% humidity. Anything over that, my violin gets a little wonky. So as I said before, you don't want to over humidify your environment for your violin, because if it goes out into a very dry environment in the wintertime, then your violin is going to be kind of cranky in adjusting to that environment. So you want to be sure that you are providing just enough humidification for your instrument, and a hygrometer does the job. For me, I have a hygrometer in my violin case that's a little circle. It's like a little gold looking device, and it has a needle that goes up and down. If you don't have one in your violin case, that's okay. They sell hygrometers online, and I can leave a link down in the description below on the hygrometer that I recommend that you get for your violin case. And in addition, some humidification pouches to help you keep up with the humidification in your instrument case. A third thing that I recommend that you do to help winterize your violin is to avoid direct heat sources, meaning you don't want to leave your violin right in front of the heater in the wintertime, because in the wintertime, the heat actually emits dry air, believe it or not. And then if your violin is next to that dry air source, that direct heat source, then you're not going to have a good time tuning your violin. I've already had many violins this season who are going out of tune, and I'm recommending to parents, I'm recommending to students to help the violin be in the room where it's warm, but not directly next to a heater. For me, I live in a home that has an electric baseboard, so I definitely don't want my violin to be right next to that electric baseboard. That'll simply be a no-go, and based on how many performances I do a year, I want my violin to be in tip-top shape and really good tuning stability. The next tip I want to offer you is to always check your violin throughout the season. What do you check for specifically? You want to check for open seams. You want to check for any cracks, something that may affect the sound of the instrument. Many times for students who don't have an expensive instrument, they're not really well made, and there's a reason for that. Sometimes the glue that makers use to make violins cheaper, sometimes the wood that they use is really not that good of a quality. And sometimes, let's say you have, oh, sorry, I just bumped into the mic here. But sometimes, let's say you have like the upper plate of the violin, and then this piece of wood is attached to the rib. Now, sometimes you might see that this starts to separate. This is really common also in very old instruments. I'm not a luthier, so I can't really tell you the range of instruments based on experience, how much they see these open seams, but it can be common for older instruments, especially if you just acquired an expensive old instrument. So you want to make sure that all the seams are nice and glued, and luthiers have this very special glue that they make in-house to make sure that all the seams are closed. What they would typically do is they would kind of rip apart the violin to assess what parts they need to fill in that seam. And sometimes the seam is not as obvious as you may think. Sometimes it could be in a place where you least expect it. So by having regular checkups with your instrument, if you have an instrument that is prone to that type of, I would say, injury for the violin, then you want to make sure that you're really just keeping up with all the seams, if they all look good and they're all really tight. You could also hear a little bit of a violin that has an open seam in it, and it'll kind of be obvious that something is wrong with it, but it may not be obvious that the seam is open. So you definitely want to just kind of check in on that. And then of course you can apply some peg compound. This is something that I've had for many years now. I probably had this for like a decade now, and you can see that it's like a kind of looks like a lipstick, but it's not. It's kind of like it's just like a peg compound. I don't even know what it's made out of. They don't even share the ingredients of this because it's super secretive. But they do sell it. It's not like you can get it at like one store. I'll actually leave another link down in the description below on how to acquire this. And what this is used is you would simply add a little bit of this on the peg, so that way it can prevent the strings from slipping. So when we have, like, let me get my violin one more time. Take a look at these pegs. These pegs, they have circles, so that way the pegs can fit inside, right? And there's like two pegs, I'm sorry, 4 different circles, yeah? Now these circles, in the winter time, when it's dry, these circles, they actually retract a little bit, and that causes the peg to slip. When there's humidity, the wood absorbs the moisture in the air and actually expands the wood, so that way it doesn't slip. That's why you see a lot more success in tuning in the summertime and in the springtime. Because, I mean, springtime maybe not so much because it's more of a transition season, but summer in particular, when you have a lot of moisture in the air, you're not going to find as much trouble tuning. But in the winter time, you may find that these pegs are slipping, and it's because we don't have enough peg compound to prevent it from slipping. So that's what essentially peg compound does. It helps stabilize the intonation of the strings when you're tuning your instrument, especially if you are not having a lot of screws here, and you tune primarily with pegs. This is the thing to get with your instrument. And those are essentially some tips on how to winterize your violin playing. Now, if you found this video helpful, I recommend that you subscribe to the channel for more violin videos to help you become a better violinist, to be a more knowledgeable violinist. And I also have other violin videos right over here and right over here for you to take a look at.